Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome to
The details will be shown on your screen throughout today's session. Just a reminder, if viewers have any questions during today's session, please do share them on the question and answer section of Zoom and YouTube, where all the questions will be answered by our guest speaker at the end. However, we do recommend the Zoom platform for more of an effective online experience. After today's session, if any brothers have any further questions and require some further guidance, please do not hesitate to email us and we will forward your details to our guest speaker. In addition to this, for our sisters, if you have any questions, concerns, and require some further advice, please also email us at teamhopesdi@gmail.com, where we will forward your details to Sister Sitara. Sister Sitara studied law and then went on to do a graduate scheme at KPMG in management consulting, and now has been there for over 5 years with experience across a range of different sectors from banking to government bodies. Sister Sitara has kindly offered to help any sisters who may have any questions around what different roles available within the Big Four and questions around the application process and how to prepare for them. Now, today's topic is on the Big Four graduate scheme, Introduction to the World of Finance, which will be delivered by our guest speaker, Mubarak Dawood. Many of our viewers may not be aware of the term Big Four and the different types of opportunities available for students. Brother Mubarak has been fortunate to experience the working life within one of the Big Four through the graduate route. I would like to welcome Brother Mubarak to Hope, and Jazakallah for accepting our invitation today. Are you there, Brother Mubarak?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, brother?
Alhamdulillah, I'm very well, thank you. How are yourself?
Alhamdulillah. Brother Mubarak, before you commence today's topic, can you kindly share with our viewers your background, your experience from your education and your employment, so our viewers get a glimpse of where you are right now and how you got there?
Yeah, certainly. If I may, I'm just going to share my screen. So I've got a few slides prepared about that. So as I was saying to you guys earlier, I was actually born and raised in Bolton. So, some of you may know me. I'm local to the Masjid Nur Islam. That was my local masjid, and I studied there in the madrasa for a few years. As of about 7 years ago, I moved to Manchester with my family, and I've been working in Manchester as well for that period of time. There's Masjid Nur Islam as well. In terms of my career, well, let's step back before I start my career. In terms of my academic background, I was schooled in Bolton Primary Secondary School, 6th form. I went to Turton 6th form, and then I went to university to study mathematics for 3 years. And at the end of my sort of university time, I hadn't planned out my future sort of professional career, too far into the future. So at the end of university, I wasn't sure what I know with my maths background and any sort of skills and knowledge and experience that I'd picked up through doing mathematics and sciences through my in my academic career. I thought it'd be useful to apply it in the finance world. So I applied for PwC through the graduate scheme for audit, as you mentioned. And then, so I finished the graduate scheme with PwC. In 3 years, I stayed on further for another 2.5 years. With PwC, I did an internal secondment to one of our offices in London. And then shortly after the end of that secondment, I joined Santander. So I was looking to move outside of PwC anyway, at some point in the future. And when I found the role at Santander, I joined them as a financial analyst. And that really is sort of doing reporting around performance, income and balance sheet and margins, for example, of the bank. And I am still specifically based in the corporate and commercial side of Santander. So that's the part of the bank that deals with medium to large companies, up to the very largest sort of corporate businesses as well. And that is opposed to the retail part of the bank that deals with individuals like us, and also smaller businesses. And that's a short sort of summary of my career to date. I've been at Santander for almost 7 years now, and I still am a finance manager at Santander.
Subhanallah, mashallah. To be honest with you, Mubarak bhai, I've been looking forward to this session, specifically for the reason is a lot of parents are unaware of the opportunities that the Big Four provide for children at finishing GCSEs, A-levels, and graduating at university. So hopefully a lot of parents and students will gain a lot of information from this session. By all means, the stage is yours. You can take it away.
Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, yes. So hopefully it'll be beneficial to all of our viewers today. And I think, definitely there's underrepresentation in general in finance from our sort of Asian community or Muslim faith people. So we often don't think of it as an industry to explore and see if we'd sort of fit in there or it'd suit us. So definitely worth considering if you like this talk, I suppose. And then continuing about myself a little more in terms of my interests. I'm a big fan of road cycling. I try to do some long cycles, organized cycles every year. And also I am a big fan of sort of the outdoors. So I love hiking and going for long walks in the national parks. And again, also in my sort of spare time, I do volunteer for some local organizations and charities, faith-based charities that are working with our Muslim communities in and around Bolton, Manchester and Liverpool as well. And it's worth noting that I volunteer for them in a financial capacity. So my finance career has also, alhamdulillah, allowed me to serve our Muslim communities and serve our deen as well, alhamdulillah. So let's sort of start the talk. The target audience for this talk is anybody sort of who's doing GCSEs, preparing for GCSEs, or doing A-levels, or is at university, or even if you're past university and you're sort of at a later stage in your career, but you've got a university degree, then you can also apply to the Big Four undergraduate scheme. Okay, that might surprise you, but we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So the target audience is almost anybody, sort of 14 onwards, but the majority of people that apply to the graduate schemes are people that are just leaving university. So the sort of the primary target audience are those people that are roughly between the ages of 15 and maybe 23, 24. And we're going to start with the basics. So I'm going to assume there's no prior knowledge about, finance or the Big Four, just sort of to bring everybody on board. Because I remember when I was doing my, just leaving university, for example, I knew roughly what finance was, but I didn't know much about what audit was and what the Big Four were, etc. So I'll bring you all up to speed and then I'll go a bit more in detail about the actual graduate schemes themselves. So what is finance? If you look it up in the dictionary and as a noun, you might find that finance is the management of large amounts of money, especially by governments or large companies. So as you can see, it's a pretty broad definition, and really the world of finance is a pretty broad world. You can do lots of different types of roles in finance. It's not as, they're not all the same. It can really vary and it can suit different types of people. So that's one thing, firstly, to appreciate that finance doesn't mean that you're just an accountant and everybody's doing the same job. Okay. And another sort of more flowery definition I found on the internet is that finance can be defined as the science and art of managing money. Something in common with the first definition. It's about money. It's about managing money. It's about knowing so how much money a company might have or a business might have and what they're going to do with the money. And it's important here where the definition mentions science and art. Although finance, and when we talk about money, you're talking about numbers mostly, which is where the science part comes in. And you need sort of the numbers to be accurate and precise. Also, part of finance, there is a lot of judgment involved in certain roles more than others, a lot of subjectivity as well, and a lot of sort of assumptions involved. And that's where the art side of it comes in, of working in finance. Okay, so it's a pretty broad world when it comes to the world of finance. What are the big four in that then? So the big four listed here, you've got PricewaterhouseCoopers, often referred to as PwC, Ernst & Young, often just EY is used, Deloitte & Touche, or just Deloitte, and KPMG, which has a long German name, so I'll just call it KPMG. And these are the four largest professional services firms in the world in terms of their market share. And in terms of sort of their global revenue from the professional services sector. The four of these are comparable in size and sort of in terms of their workforce as well. They are comparable and they're comparable in terms of the service they provide as well to other sort of companies. So we're going to talk more about audit in this presentation, but they also do provide a broad range of services, taxation, we mentioned earlier, management consulting, actuarial services, which is anything to do with pensions. They provide corporate finance services as well, which is about how large corporate companies structure their finances, especially around when they're sort of merging and acquiring other businesses as well. And they will also provide legal advice too. And this is just sort of a summary of some of the main departments. And some of these more than others might have other smaller departments as well of services they provide to the professional services industry. Each of these will have a graduate scheme in each of the sort of specific departments. So there'll be a tax graduate scheme. There might be an actuarial graduate scheme. Not all of them will have a graduate scheme. So some of them might take on experienced hires. For example, sometimes for corporate finance, you can't get into a graduate scheme for corporate finance, but if you complete the audit graduate scheme, then you can transfer to the corporate finance department. So those kind of routes are possible. And just to sort of show you the dominance that these big four have in terms of the industry, if you look at the FTSE 100 companies, so the top 100 companies listed under the Financial Times index, then 99% of these are audited by one of the big four. Okay, so that's literally 99 out of the 100 companies are audited by one of the big four. And then if you look at the FTSE 250, then 96% of them are audited by one of the big four. So as you can imagine, they have a massive dominance of the larger corporate businesses. And this is because of the service that they provide and the excellence of it. Now to show you a comparison of where the big four sit compared to the rest of them, this is the chart showing global revenue of the top 7 professional services firms. And as I said, the big four stand out. They're somewhat comparable. Their revenues are between 20 billion and sort of 36, 37 billion of billion pounds rather. And the 5th largest company, which is BDO, is only at 7.4. So that's less than a third the size of KPMG. And similarly, if you look at the professional services firms in the UK, the big four are the same four. Okay, so it's PwC, Deloitte, EY, and KPMG once again. BDO is still in 5th position, and it's only at 0.6 billion of revenue compared to KPMG, which is 2.3. And you can see that clearly it's less than a quarter of the size of KPMG. The difference between the big four really and the other sort of other companies in the top 10, because the other companies do also provide graduate schemes. The main difference is the experience and the quality of training that you get from the Big Four cannot be found really anywhere else. And the career boost that it gives you cannot be found with the other smaller companies in the top 10. And we'll talk more about what you get from going through the Big Four graduate scheme later on as well. So what is the graduate or the audit graduate scheme? Okay, so audit is a general sort of term, means sort of to check something or review something. But here we're specifically talking about statutory audits in most cases. And this is where there's a legal requirement in the UK for companies that meet certain criteria of turnover and of employees, that they need a statutory audit performed by independent auditors. And the job of these auditors is to review the company's financial statements, typically including an income statement and a balance sheet and perhaps even a cash flow. And they need to sign off on the accuracy and completeness of these statements. Excuse me. And the auditor's job is to basically sign off to say whether they are a true representation of the company's performance and position, and whether they are a fair representation of the performance and position. The graduate scheme is a 3-year training contract, basically. You're employed by the firm for 3 years. You're put through some training as well. You go to college for your tuition, you do your exams, you qualify as a chartered accountant under the audit graduate scheme and under the tax graduate scheme as well. And really it's open to anybody with a university degree. Okay, so it doesn't mean that you have to join straight after university. When I was on the graduate scheme, there were other trainees with me that had joined from other careers. Okay, so there's one lady who was a lecturer in English language at the University of Cambridge. And then she joined, and she'd done that for a few years, and she was in her sort of late 30s when she joined the PwC audit scheme. And there was also another brother who, after university, he went abroad to study the Dean in Egypt for a few years. He came back and then joined the graduate scheme as well. And there was a few other examples as well of where people had a change in career to join the graduate scheme. So you don't have to, like I say, you don't have to do it straight after university. So if you wanted to apply for the graduate scheme, what do you need to apply? It's worth bearing in mind that the criteria for application are currently more relaxed than they have ever been in the past. To increase diversity of the workforce, basically, that is the idea. There's sort of a current sort of modern philosophy in human resourcing that the more diverse your workforce is, the more inclusive it is, the better it will perform and the more successful it is. So the big corporates are usually in the forefront of adopting these new philosophies and methodologies, and they're trying to make their workforce as diverse as possible in terms of genders, background, ethnicities, faiths, etc. In the past, about maybe 10 years ago, when I was applying, there was a minimum requirement for A levels. I think at the time it was an A and 2 Bs required for A level to apply. You need a 2-1 or be on track for a 2-1 at degree level to apply, otherwise you couldn't apply. And you also needed to pass some online tests and stuff. Now, if you take Ernst & Young, for example, there's no minimum criteria for A levels. There's no minimum degree grade either. You can still apply with even if you got a 3rd, as long as you passed. And you don't need to have had some past work experience, but you need to do some online assessments. So this is good news in general for those people that might not have the best A levels and might not have the best academic career. If they're not the brightest person when it comes to passing exams and sort of, getting the highest grades, this is good news. But what this means is that there's a wider pool of applicants. So for each position in the training scheme, there's more applicants. So it's almost harder to get in. And you also, it's worth bearing in mind that you don't need a background in accounting or finance. You don't need to have done accounting or finance at A level, and you don't need to have done something that's accounting related or finance related or even maths related at degree level. Whilst I did do maths and I applied for the scheme, other people in my training scheme at the same time as me, some had done engineering, others had done sort of English literature, others had done art. So it really doesn't matter what discipline you took in doing your degree. There was even one lady who'd done medicine and then decided to drop out of medicine and go into the world of finance, and then she joined one of the big four as well. So it really, you can really apply from any discipline as long as you do have a degree. So what we want to say here is that yes, the application criteria are more relaxed, and it's easier to apply and it's easier for your application to be reviewed, but it doesn't mean you're going to get a place. You still need to sort of justify and explain why you might not have got the best A levels and why you might not have got the highest degree. And it's not as though you would be automatically assumed to be not suitable, but there may well be people with reasons. So they give you a chance to come in for an interview and go through the assessments. So what is the application process? If you decide to apply and you get past this stage, you have some A levels and you have a degree, what's the process of application onto the graduate scheme? It varies from firm to firm, but generally you have an online application to complete, and that will include uploading a CV. Incidentally, Team Hope did a really good presentation. I think it was the first one done by Brother Muhammad Ali on how to prepare an outstanding or a standout CV. I definitely recommend watching that. I watched that myself as well. And improve your CV, get it to the best standard before you upload it into this application portal. Also, as part of your online application, you'll have to fill in some questions around your experiences and your competencies. So for example, you might have a question around, you might have to give an example around where you've led a team to success, or where you've had a really sort of challenging task to complete and how you went about completing it, or where you had competing priorities on your time and how you went about meeting those priorities and managing your time effectively. So those kind of questions might come up as part of your online application, and you can draw experiences really from any part of life. It doesn't have to be, from past jobs, or it doesn't have to be from your university career. You can talk about sport, for example, or you can talk about any particular hobbies that you might have, as long as it is a genuine and a good response to the questions. Okay. And the third part you have typically on the online applications are psychometric tests or online assessments. Typically, you'll have 2 or 3 of these, where they try to gauge how you perform on sort of finding mathematical patterns and say how your sort of language skills are, so how well you can read a few paragraphs and comprehend the information within, and then answer some sort of related questions. And this is an important part of the assessment, because what you sort of achieve in your degree and what your sort of your past experiences are, they're hard to compare from applicant to applicant. Okay, getting a 2-1 or a first in one particular degree at a particular university doesn't mean that you're automatically better than somebody else, because they might have done a harder course and might have done it at a harder university. But the online psychometric test, because everybody does the same test, it's easier to compare people, and the tests are also sort of designed to remove any bias from culture, ethnicity, or background, for example. So they kind of try to sort of make them as commonsensical, if that's a word, as possible. If you get past the online application stage, then you'll be invited to a first stage interview with typically a manager, so a mid-management level person in the firm. And at the interview, they'll try to understand why you applied and what your background is, and what sort of how you are as a person, what your personality is like, what your character is like, whether you'd fit in to the firm, whether you're suitable for the graduate audit scheme in terms of the challenges that it presents, and what kind of person it requires. And if you get past that first stage as well, then the second stage is usually an assessment day. And then this will be usually a 4 or 5 hour day that you're called to one of the offices, and it'll consist of multiple parts, typically a group exercise where there are a number of applicants on the day. Maybe 5 or 6 of you will be put into a group exercise where you have to read a portfolio around a project perhaps, and then discuss things between yourselves as a group and answer some specific questions around that project. That day will also include a partner interview, and a partner is somebody who actually has a share in a PwC office, and they will ultimately make the decision on whether you get hired or not. So if on the day you're going to succeed and give your best at any part of the day, make sure it's the partner interview, because if you impress the partner, then you probably get hired, even if perhaps you don't do as well in the group exercise. And the partners generally are really good at working out what somebody is like. Okay, they've got lots of experience with at dealing with people. They will have done lots of these interviews, because you wouldn't get to a partner in PwC, without doing maybe 10 or so years at PwC. So they will have done lots of interviews of trainees and graduates. So they've got lots of experience. So if you put up a front and pretend to be somebody else, then you'd probably get found out. So my advice would be to sort of try to be as honest as possible and be your best, try to relax, and get the partner to like you as a person, because it's not just about your academic achievements. And finally, the third thing that you'll have to do is a repeat of your online tests. And this is just to make sure that when you did the online ones from home, that it was really yourself doing them. Sometimes people are a bit cheeky. They might get their best friend who's really good at doing online tests to do the test for them. And then when they actually do it themselves in person, if they get to the second stage, they perform a lot worse. And that'll sort of be a red flag for the recruitment team, that perhaps you weren't the person that did the test the first time online, and you may get not sort of hired on that basis. So I'd recommend practicing the tests beforehand. You can get examples of doing online or psychometric tests online. As well as that, usually when you're applying online, the company, let's say PwC, they'll give you some example tests and example questions that you can practice on, just to get familiar with the format of the test before you actually do the real test. So make sure you're really comfortable with how to do the test. Make sure you get your practice done beforehand, so when you do it online, you perform as well as you can. And when you repeat it on site, if you get to the second stage, then you do again as well as you can. So this is typically the application process. One thing also to mention is that there is another sort of back route onto the graduate scheme, okay? And that is the summer internship that is available usually to students that are still at university. And I'm sure the Big Four offer this, as well as some of the other companies in the top 10 offer a summer internship. And this is basically between your ultimate year and your penultimate year. So if it's a 3-year course, after your second year of university finishes, in that summer holiday, you can do a 6-week internship in the audit department. And they'll sort of show you the ropes, so to speak, teach you a little about audit, and give you a bit of a rounded experience as to what the audit world is like within the time of 6 weeks. Okay. And if you perform well and you like the audit role and you want to apply for the graduate scheme, and they like you as well, then they will automatically give you a place on the graduate scheme, so that you can almost treat that into an interview in and of itself. Because if you do well at it, and they like you as well, then they'll automatically give you a place on the graduate scheme. So you don't have to go through this application process for the graduate scheme. However, you would still have to go through a similar application process for the summer internship itself. Okay. In terms of timing for the applications as well, They do actually start quite early. The graduate schemes, the actual contract of employment starts around September, usually in the first week of September. But you have to really apply 12 months in advance. Okay, it's not as though you can apply in July and start in September. You apply 12 months in advance. The deadlines for applications are usually around October of the year before. And that's because, as we said before, most applicants will be from university. They might be in their university campuses, away from home, away from their office of application. And it'll be hard for them to travel for interview days and assessment days whilst they're at university. So typically, application deadlines are in October, so whilst you're at university, and then when those students that have applied, when they're back at home for their Christmas break, that's when the interviews are held. So when I was at university, I travelled back. I was home in sort of December, January time, and I had my first stage interview, second stage interview in that period. And then I went back to university to complete my second term and third term of university. And then after the summer holidays, I started my contract in September. You would find out after you've done your assessments, first stage and second stage, you kind of find out whether you've got an offer or not almost immediately. So before I started university again in January, I had been offered a place on the graduate audit scheme in the coming September. And typically, if you haven't finished your degree yet, it'll be subjective to a particular graded degree, if that is one of the application criteria. So when I got my application, it was when I got the offer, it was subject to getting a 2-1 at university. So that's something to bear in mind, because a lot of people don't realize, if they haven't looked at it in advance, that the application deadline for the September start is actually 12 months before the start date. Also, we're talking about a September start here, which is the main sort of start point for the graduate schemes, but some firms might also have an April start as well. So giving a sort of another sort of 6-7 months delay. They will have a later deadline for application, but also there are fewer places available on the April start as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind. So if you do apply, then how would you be successful? Okay. So it's worth remembering that the firm basically wants to assess your strengths and your future potential. It's not just about your academic achievements to date. Okay. You might have got all A's at GCSE and A level, and be on track for a really good score at your degree as well, but it doesn't mean that the audit scheme is for you. Okay, even though you might be a really sort of high flyer in terms of academic achievements. Likewise, the opposite, you might not be a high flyer, but you might have the right personality and character to be successful in the audit scheme. Okay, so just bear that in mind. To be successful, you need to sort of really show your personality and your character, and that will come out at the interview stage. And your questions will be around different sort of character traits. I mean, I remember one of the questions that I got was, if you were the manager of a team, an audit team, for example, on site, and one of your team members, junior team members, wanted to leave early, 2 hours early one day, what would you say? Okay, so there's no particular right or wrong answer, but they want to see how you'd sort of deal with that kind of situation and why. So would you be the type of person that would say, no, you can't leave early, you need to do your fixed hours for the day, make sure you finish your hours and then leave at 5:30? Or would you be more flexible and say, okay, well, if your work for that day is done and you've not got any other sort of urgent work that needs to be completed, then you're allowed to leave early. Maybe you have an appointment, maybe something else. Would you ask where they want to go, or would you not ask? And what would you do if that becomes a regular occurrence, for example? So those kind of things would sort of draw out what kind of person you are, what kind of leader you'd be in a team. And also, it's important to have interests outside of work, outside of your academic studies. Okay, so that really adds more depth to your personality, whether you have, hobbies, or do you do any, so do you play any sports competitively, do you have any other interests. These questions will almost definitely be asked at your interview stage. So have answers ready, and if you don't have interests, I'd say find some interests, because I'm sure now, especially in lockdown, we've all got a bit of extra time to sort of find some new hobbies, and something that would sort of develop us personally as well. And the final thing is, you might be an incredible person in terms of your personality and character, and you might have really good interests, but what do you know about the finance world? Okay, you don't have to know about audit per se. You don't have to be an auditor, because the training scheme is going to make you into an auditor. They're going to teach you how to do an audit. So you don't have to go into an interview and say how you have to do an audit, but they expect you to have some kind of interest in the financial world. Okay, if you're completely clueless about the UK economy, you're completely clueless about, how, let's say, in current affairs, how the pandemic is affecting businesses, how the pandemic is affecting the economy, then they'd question whether the graduate audit scheme is right for you, because you're working in the finance world. You'll be dealing with clients of PwC, for example, that are businesses, and they expect you to have some kind of interest in the financial world. So to do that, it's not that hard. If you don't have, if you're not that knowledgeable, or you don't sort of, you don't have a background in finance, you don't have to read lots of books, or you don't have to have, studied business or something at university. All you have to sort of do is slowly work away at it. So I'd recommend something like, reading maybe the finance pages from a newspaper every week. Even set your homepage on your browser perhaps to the business page or the economy page on the BBC website. So subconsciously, even without trying, whenever you log onto your browser, whatever, you might see an article or something that pops out at you, and read things from time to time as well. So almost definitely at the next sort of interview stages, you would be asked about how you think different industries coped during the pandemic, how you think the hospitality industry would, whether that industry would bounce back after the pandemic or not, what the travel industries, the tourist industries, how they were affected, and sort of which industries weren't affected, whether you have any insight or any opinion on those kind of things. There's not always a right or wrong answer, but they want you to sort of think around questions and offer some opinion, even though it might be wrong, but they want you to have an opinion sometimes, and to sort of demonstrate that you have thought about things. So what does the role actually involve? Suppose now you actually got onto the graduate audit scheme. What would you do? What does your role involve? So the scheme involves studying towards your chartered accountancy qualification. Okay, now the good thing is that the Big Four will send you off to professional colleges for your college tuition. Okay, so your professional tuition, you'll have dedicated time, or usually sort of a few weeks, that you go to a professional qualifications college instead of your office, and you'll be taught there whatever exams that you need to sit. You'll be taught the material for that, and at the end of that period, you will do your exams. Usually when you start your graduate scheme, the first 6 weeks you don't go to the office, and you're not part of it. You're not actually doing any audit work. You go straight to college, and you do your first sort of 6 or so exams as part of your qualification. The first few exams are usually the easier ones. Some exams will involve direct tuition at college. Some exams will be home study. The material will be provided to you by the college as part of the wider course, but it'll be home study driven. The college tuition and the exams will be paid for by the Big Four as well. So that's a big bonus. You don't really have to pay for anything unless you're resitting exams. The first exam is paid for and it's free. And then resits cost anything between £400 to £800, depending on which exam you're resitting. Okay. The work also involves, when you're actually doing the audit work, you're working in lots of different teams. Okay. Most jobs generally in any industry will involve you working in a team, but this particular role in audit, you won't just be working in a team, you'll be working in lots of different teams. So you might be working in one particular team for 2 weeks, and then you'll go to another job where you'll work under another team, and it might be a different size team as well, with different managers, different seniors. So you'll constantly be making sort of new friends and new colleagues, and that can sometimes be not suitable for some people. Some people like to, be settled and, not have that much social interaction and be always sort of meeting new team members and working in different teams. So it's worth thinking about whether this role is for you if you like a more stable, routine job. Okay, but in this role, you'll be working with lots of different teams of different sizes, and different sort of shapes and different places as well. You do lots of communicating, lots of speaking to senior managers, partners as well, and you have to speak to client staff as well. So every time you do an audit, for example, of a different client that the Big Four have, you have new client staff to deal with. Okay, so you need to be familiar. You need to be good in terms of social skills. You need to know how to be pleasant. How to not annoy client staff. Some clients find the presence of auditors on site a bit annoying, let's say, or inconvenient, to say the least. So you need to be able to deal with those kind of staff in a good way, because you're basically representing PwC or one of the Big Four when you go out to a client site. So you have to be the best you can be. Also, especially in the audit scheme, there's a lot of commuting involved, a lot of traveling involved to different client sites. Okay, when you're actually doing the audit work, you tend not to be in the office. You have to go out to wherever your client's based. So when I was on the audit scheme, I was living in Bolton. Most jobs would be around the northwest. Okay, but some jobs would be a bit further afield. So I remember I had one job that was in Bradford for about 2 weeks every year. Okay, I had one job that I had to travel to Milton Keynes for. So that was an away job. You have sometimes away jobs as well. An away job an away job is where you stay away at a hotel for 3 nights or 4 nights in the week. But for example, on the Bradford job, that wasn't an away job. That was a job that you'd expect to commute to and from every day. Okay, so that was about a 1.5 hour drive to Bradford, and from Bradford back to Bolton through rush hour. And that's just a normal job. It's quite expected. So during my time in audit, for anybody that drives, during my time in audit, I must have clocked about 15 to 18,000 miles on my car, just from, most of that will be from driving for work reasons. Whereas compared to now, where my job is with Santander is from a fixed office, before the pandemic it was anyway, I travel about 8,000 miles a year. So a lot less than, so you can say roughly another 10,000 just from doing the audit role. So you have to be comfortable with traveling to different sites and working long hours. And I guess that there needs to be stress on the amount of hours that you work. It is hard work going through the training scheme for audit, and it's to be the same presumably for other graduate schemes as well, so in tax and in actuarial. Also long hours are required, but it's worth noting that in tax and in actuarial services, for example, there's not as much traveling involved. So you wouldn't be based at the client site for example. You might be traveling to the client maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, but you can do a lot of the job from the office itself. Whereas for audit, most of the work you have to be on. Okay. And sorry, I was mentioning on the long hours and hard work that's required. So that should not be underestimated. Okay. You often work, you can say, antisocial hours. You have to work, you're expected to work into the evenings sometimes some extra work on weekends. The office, you'll have access to your office 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You'll have access to the office. Although your contractual working hours will be usually 9 to 5:30, Monday to Friday, it'll be rare that you actually work just those hours and you don't work past 5:30. But this is a sacrifice that if you want to qualify as a chartered accountant and want to get the training done with the Big Four, then it's a sacrifice that needs to be made. And this is it's expected because you have short reporting deadlines typically when it comes to audit work. When I was at PwC, we had a concept of busy season, and when I started in my first few years, busy season was sort of January, February, and March. The first 3 months, typically, you're the majority of clients might have their year-end, financial year-end at the end of December. So January, February, and March will be the busier time of the year. But then towards the end of my time, then that 3 month became a 6 month period, and then it became a 9 month period, because it just became busy all year round. And you can be busy in the middle of the summer as well, because some jobs have summer year ends, and that's what the reporting deadlines, that's when they are. So you can be busy at any time of the year, and you'd be expected to put the extra hours in to support the team and get the audit completed and over the line. So to succeed in the graduate audit scheme, you need to firstly pass all your exams. Okay, I mentioned before that if you fail, you can resit at your own expense. You can resit, but passing exams is part of your performance rating as well. So if you don't pass particular exams in a particular year, you might be held in that year of your training, and you might have to repeat that year, for example. But typically, I wouldn't worry that much. Roughly 80% of those in the Big Four, 80% of those in the Big Four will pass each exam in their first attempt, and almost everybody from the Big Four will pass the exam in the second attempt if they take a second attempt. Because you're working in teams all the time, you need to be an effective team member to begin with. In the first 2 years, you'll probably be a team member, and there'll be a senior audit team leader on site. But then in your third year, you'll start leading audit teams on your client sites. So you need to be comfortable with being a team leader as well. You don't need to be an amazing team member or team leader rather, from the point of applying for the job. But you need to sort of pick up those skills as you're going through your training, and be comfortable with leading teams, and sort of achieving the team's objectives. Okay, you need good verbal and written communication skills as well. You'll be sending sort of plenty of emails to your own managers as well as their clients as well. They need to be well written, and when you're speaking to clients and when you're speaking to your own managers, you need to be able to communicate clearly and precisely as well. And as we said before, because you're meeting so many new people throughout the year, you don't have a fixed team in audit as well, and you don't also have because you're always meeting new clients throughout the year, you need good social skills as well. You need to be not just good social skills, but you need to be a sociable person. And also, I guess, to really succeed within the training scheme and to set yourself apart from other trainees, you need a proactive attitude. Okay, this is the kind of role, and in the Big Four, you won't get pushed that much to go above and beyond what your base requirement is for your role. Okay, if you just get the audit done and nothing else, then you'll probably get a satisfactory performance rating at the end of each year, but you won't stand out from the crowd. To stand out, you need to be more proactive. You need to look for opportunities. When you're a first year on the scheme, you need to look for opportunities and ask to do some tasks that a second year would do. And when you're a second year, ask to do tasks that a third year would do. And also maybe look around the office. Maybe you can get involved in giving presentations to your department internally, as well as sharing any particular skills or experiences that you might have as you go through your training. If you get maybe very proficient at using Excel, for example, then maybe you can hold Excel skills courses for the trainees or more junior trainees. All of those things will set you apart from your other trainees and help you succeed in your training scheme, as well as generally outside of your training contract as you progress through your career at one of the Big Four. And we mentioned before, you need to be willing to travel and sort of have long commutes as well. It is very helpful to have a car. Okay, I did mention that earlier, but having a car to travel to the different client sites will save a lot of time. You do get repaid for the petrol. You can recharge that back to PwC, and they'll sort of reimburse you for petrol costs. If you don't have a car, and not everybody does, if you don't have a car, then you have to sort of use public transport and get yourself there whatever way you do, and your sort of your train tickets or your bus tickets, etc., will be reimbursed by PwC as well. But don't forget, it'll add on time. Public transport isn't as quick as just getting in the car and driving from your door to the client's office. I remember myself, I started and I did about 6 or 7 months using public transport, and it was such a relief to have when I bought a car 7 months on, because it just saved so much time. So I definitely recommend to learn to drive if you aren't a driver yet, and see if you can get a car. You can also, when I was in PwC, they had a car scheme that they were offering to the employees. So that would be available if you want to get a car, but you don't have large amounts of savings. And then finally, as we mentioned before, you need a strong work ethic to succeed. You need to work hard. You need to be committed to the role. You need to sacrifice sometimes your time, sometimes your weekends, sometimes maybe, you know, your lunch, you know, work through a lunch, work through a dinner. If you do, I mean, they do look after you as well. So if you, for example, find yourself working in the office late into the evening, then there's policies around, you know, when PwC would reimburse you for your dinner, and how much and what kind of limit they reimburse you for as well. So if you end up working to 8 p.m., 9 p.m. in the office, etc., you can probably order some a Deliveroo or something to the office and recharge that, so you don't have to pay for it. But that's just maybe a regular day. I remember some jobs that I was when I was at PwC, that we were finishing at the client site, you know, at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. when the clients closing their offices and kicking us out. We'd then, as a team, drive back to our office, which was the Manchester office, and then work on, you know, past 8 from 8 p.m. until maybe, you know, midnight, and even after that. And this is not just something that I was doing. It was being done as a team because certain deadlines needed to be met and certain work needed to be done by a particular time. And it does, your contribution and your effort, your sacrifice does get appreciated. It does get noticed. So I wouldn't think that you wouldn't get noticed, but if you would also get noticed if you weren't putting the effort in as well. So it's something that is a sacrifice that needs to be made to get through the graduate scheme. And then if you don't, you know, if you want a more stable job with more regular hours, then you can always look for another job afterwards, after you've qualified and you've sort of completed the 3-year training scheme. But whilst you're in the scheme, the personal sacrifice, the dedication and commitment is really important. So if you're doing all that, what do you get back as reward? Okay. So there's sort of 2 types. There's your financial, your cash remuneration that you'll get, and general career benefits. When you're starting on the graduate scheme, I just checked with one of my cousins who has just finished the graduate scheme, in fact. The starting salary is about 21k. Okay, that'll be similar across the big 4. Now, 21k, bearing in mind that, okay, 21k is not that high when it comes to graduate schemes. Okay, if you're looking outside of audit graduate schemes, you might find generally graduate schemes maybe with lawyers or other companies that offer graduate schemes that start around maybe 27k, 28k. Okay, but don't forget, the big 4 are giving you 21k, but they're paying for your college tuition as well, and they're paying for your exams as well, and you ultimately qualify as a chartered accountant at the end of that. Other higher paying graduate schemes sometimes might not have a qualification that you finish with as well. Okay, the other thing that is, you know, not tangible in terms of money is your sort of your career benefits that you get from working with the big 4. Okay, once you put the big 4 name on your CV, that automatically stands you out. Haven't been trained through the Big Four. They have a massive reputation. The other companies in the Big Ten. So it's worth bearing in mind that whilst you might not be paid early stage, you get all these benefits that enhance your career. So like I said, starting on 21K, your exams, you'll maybe get about 23K, 24K. In your third year, 28K. This is all before you qualify. Exams within 2 years, basically, of the 3-year contract. But as part of qualification, you also need to do a certain number of hours, which equates to roughly about 3 years with a qualified firm, and the Big Four will be one of the qualified firms with the accountancy board. You've done your 3 years and you become qualified and you're registered with one of the institutes or the boards of chartered accountancy, then your salary will jump to about 38K as a qualified accountant in year 4. The training contract ends is only sort of 3 years long. It kind of rolls on. So if you stay on at PwC or any one of the other Big Four firms, you don't usually sign or a new contract. Your contract rolls on. There's some terms that allows you to stay in employment after your 3-year training. So after you've qualified, there's another promotion that you can have, and that is to an audit manager. You'd have to typically interview for some of these positions, but not all firms will have an interview process for audit manager. Some of them might just promote you if you're performing well. As an audit, 8 to 10K pay rise and additional benefits as well. Typically, you'd remain an audit manager for about 3 years. And then if you're doing well in that role, you'd get promoted to a senior audit manager with a slightly higher salary. And then another 3 or 4 years as senior audit manager, you'd be interviewing for audit director roles, which are around 80K and again, some extra benefits as well. And then after that, if you want, if you're successful, you can apply for partnership. And in partnership, you're talking sort of 6-figure salaries, and it can sort of vary anything between a few £100K to £1,000 depending on how long you are as a partner. Okay, so a few £1,000,000 just is a lot. It sounds like a lot. Okay, but I wouldn't recommend anybody to join the audit scheme because they want to be a partner as such, because there's no guarantee of getting to a partner stage. But if you like the sound of audit and you want to become a chartered accountant, then I definitely recommend joining one of the Big Four, just for the quality of the training that you get, as well as the boost that it gives you to your career afterwards as well. And then you'll know enough about the firm and what audit is like once you've done the audit scheme, and then you can choose whether you want to stay in audit or whether you want to sort of transfer to another internal department, or whether you so in addition to your base pay, you often also get some pension contribution as well. It used to be fairly small, the bonus, compared to what kind of bonuses you might get in industry outside of the Big Four. And sorry, industry, I mean like businesses that sell products and services that are not professional services. So, you know, a company that might be sort of, making boxes, or, so if you go to work for, say, a school, for example, and work in their finance department, a service provider. And there's often other employee benefits as well. As I mentioned, there's usually a car scheme that you can get, and maybe some of the sort of employee discounts that you can get as well. In terms of career benefits, I mentioned sort of, the Big Four. Even now, if I apply for a job now, having left PwC 7 years ago and having almost 10 years of post-qualification experience, if I apply for a job now, the fact that I have PwC on my CV makes me stand out from other candidates. So it really does add a lot of value to you as a professional. Also within the Big Four, after you finish your training, there are opportunities inside. I mentioned earlier that I did a 6-month secondment to an internal department in London. Okay, and I'd recommend anybody who does go through the Big Four to seek opportunities internally as well, whether it's a secondment or a transfer to another department. You can go to tax, you can go to business recovery services. They'll be in to get there, but I'd recommend just broadening your experiences a bit before you choose to leave one of the Big Four. And the final benefit, and this is a benefit, a sort of a benefit that the Big Four emphasize and sell to you, is that you're working with, in the Big Four, you're working with a really sort of broad and vast network of really highly skilled and talented professionals, people that are effectively at the top of their game in terms of what they're doing. You'll have partners that are brilliant, you'll have managers that are brilliant. So it's a really good opportunity for you to learn from them, set them as your mentors, whether it be formally or informally, and learn sort of skills and how to progress and how to sort of be successful professionally from them as well. So that's something that also you can get from the Big Four, the smaller companies. Okay, so all those additional career benefits afford PwC and the like to pay you a little less, because they know that paying you 21k in year one, they're adding a lot more value to yourself by giving you exceptional training, and also putting their name on your CV means that your career will have a sort of a more steeper trajectory than somebody who will have not trained with the Big Four. And finally, I think I mentioned some of this, but this is opportunities outside. After qualification. What can you do after you've qualified, after you've become a chartered accountant? What can you do? You can either stay in the audit department and move up the ranks if you love audit. If not, some people really don't like audit, then you can look for internal secondment. So as I mentioned, go to other departments, broaden your horizons a bit, broaden your knowledge, your experience, and that will also make you more employable if you leave one of the Big Four and apply for a job somewhere else. So when I applied for Santander, the fact that I had done a 6-month secondment internally made me more employable, because I wasn't just somebody who wasn't somebody that had just done audit, but I had also some experience internally within the Big Four in another department as well. If you move outside of practice, there are a number of different kind of roles, but as I said before, finance is really a really broad church. But the typical roles that you end up into, you can sort of do an internal audit role. Now, the large companies will have an internal audit department, and this is where they have an internal team or an internal department that does part of the audit work that external auditors would do as well. Okay, so then you have a slight overlap between external audit work, which is what PwC would do, and what an internal audit department would do. So you've got lots of transferable skills there. You can quite easily go from being an auditor with PwC, you can go from that to an internal audit department and use some of your knowledge and experience to start doing your job without much training. Okay. You can also sort of work in other areas of finance, so you can sort of become a statutory accountant. If you don't like the statutory side of things, so if you're not somebody that likes following the rules of accounting, you can be a management accountant, for example. So this is the type of role that I went into. I was an MI accountant, and I did a bit of financial planning and analysis as well. And if you don't want to do any of that, you can even set up your own business, for example, set up your own practice, because you would be a qualified chartered accountant. You can set up your own business and provide professional services. So I think that brings me to the end of this talk. Apologies, I've slightly overrun. But generally, if I sort of put it into, summarize the graduate audit scheme, then really it's hard to get in, but if you prepare well and you give it your best, then you can get in. There are fewer barriers to application now, so you should definitely apply if you're interested, and you can get in. Once you're in, it requires a lot of hard work in terms of passing the exams, as well as actually doing the audit work and putting the hours in as well, but it's definitely worth it. And then it really opens up a lot of doors for you after you qualify. Now, for example, as I mentioned, I went on to Santander. There were a few other opportunities that I had as well. And when I applied for Santander, I think the fact that I was Big Four trained, I did also do a secondment within Santander, within PwC as well. That made me quite employable with the role that I went into at Santander. And typically when you move from practice to industry, you would immediately almost get like a 5 to 10K pay rise. Okay. And yeah, and again, as I mentioned, it's because PwC can afford to pay you a bit less just because of that, all the extra benefits that they're providing to you, just because they're one of the Big Four. Jazakallah. So now, thank you for listening. I can take some questions if there are any.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Mubarak. Really insightful. Really insightful webinar, and I was similar to Brother Farid Bhai. I was really looking forward to it because I'm also part of this finance world, and I'm also a chartered accountant, but went through the different route. But that's another topic for some other day. I've got some few questions both from Zoom and from YouTube. So I'll start off with the Zoom ones first, go one by one, and hopefully we can take them with the same. So the first one here is, can you share some insight regarding apprenticeship opportunities available in the Big Four? I think you covered the graduate scheme and you covered the summer scheme as well. I think this is more of the apprenticeship, if any.
Yeah, it's worth looking on the websites. The website is usually quite informative. They'll have a careers department. In terms of apprenticeships, I think, if I remember correctly, when I was at PwC, they did have short-term apprenticeships as well. And for them, you could apply before you start university, or you don't have to start university. You could apply after you do your A-levels. Okay, I think at the time the scheme was called the Head Start scheme, something like that. You'd have different names at different firms, but they do have apprenticeship schemes. And again, it'd be a somewhat similar interview process. And those that actually, those that join the apprenticeship scheme, they ultimately end up going through the graduate scheme as well with some firms. Sometimes though, however, with the apprenticeship schemes, they will start you on another set of exams, basically. So I think sometimes you qualify as a technician first before you start doing your chartered accountancy examinations. But those people that I know of that have gone through the apprentice schemes have done really well because they just have more experience, of being at the firm. But you need to know what you want to do at that age. If I remember when I was leaving college, being 18, unless you're really certain of what you want to do and you want to be a chartered accountant, I'd say, if there's an opportunity to go to university, perhaps go to university as well and see what else is available for you. But if you really know what you want to do and this is what you want to do, then an apprenticeship scheme is a good start. And also you start getting paid from that stage as well. So it is a good way into the Big Four as well.
Okay, thank you, Raj. Thank you. The next one here is, how do I know which of the service lines should I pursue, i.e. tax, audit, consultancy?
I think the best thing to do is sort of research on the websites. I myself, I did the audit scheme, so I talk mostly about the audit scheme. As you do your chartered accountancy, you will study some tax, and I think if you join the tax graduate scheme, then you will also do the same exams and become a chartered accountant first before doing any more specific tax related examinations. But what's good is the Big Four, as well as some of the other smaller companies as well, they'll hold careers fairs at the large universities around the country. So I'd keep an eye out for those. You can go there, you can speak to the recruitment agents there, and they'll sort of present to you the different audit schemes, the different graduate schemes rather.
Can I just interrupt there for a second? In regards to that question, I think most of the top the Big Four, they have a facility on their website where they ask you a few questions, and from the questions from your answers, it tells you where your strengths are in which category, which section, either it's from tax, audit, or from consulting. But that's something that they all provide. That's all I've got to say. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I'd add on to that. Like I said before, after you've done the graduate scheme in one of the departments, there's opportunities for transfers to other departments to get a broader experience. So you can transfer after doing audit, you can transfer to tax, or transfer to business recovery or corporate finance, etc. And some departments will only sort of take experienced hires on, some might not have a graduate scheme. And for those, you sort of do the graduate scheme in audit, for example, then transfer as a qualified chartered accountant into the other departments.
Okay, thank you. Another one here is, has it been easy to practice your religion whilst working in a demanding professional environment? And do these organizations support religious commitments?
Generally, alhamdulillah, yes. Yes. You'll find at the Big Four, because as I mentioned before, they want to have quite a diverse workforce. Okay. So they don't want to put Muslims off, or, any people from other faiths off as well. So from the offices that I have been to, and of all the PwC offices that I've been to, they all had some kind of contemplation room, okay, which effectively is a prayer room, because it's the Muslims that go there and pray, right, 5 times a day, and it might be 5 times a day if you're doing the long hours as well. So I think generally they're understanding. And because you have flexibility around the times that you work, it doesn't have to be a 9 to 5. You can take a break, go and do your prayers, come back, and just work a bit later. So typically it's not a problem unless you have a specific meeting that you have to attend and you can't move it. Then I don't see why you can't go to pray, for example. You can't fast. There's no reason why you can't fast. The other sort of challenge that I'd say is that the social scene. I didn't mention it earlier. There's a social scene that you typically associate with graduates, because these people are coming out of university, and you can imagine what a university sort of student culture is like. Okay, so these students are going straight into PwC, and they're now students at on the graduate scheme, and now they're getting paid. They've got more money to spend, and so you'll typically have things like Friday evening drinks, for example, and social events might revolve around going to pubs and clubs, etc. I think that there is a way of tactfully avoiding those. And I think there's more awareness growing in the Big Four as they, again, as I say, diversify their workforce. There's more awareness growing of where, social activities might exclude certain types of employees. Okay, and it's not just Muslims that get put off by drinking and the alcohol scene. So there is an effort now, sometimes just to have social events that are, not connected to alcohol, maybe just going out to a restaurant for dinner, and then going to a pub afterwards, but you can go home before the pub part of it, I suppose. So I think there is awareness of that. And there are also Muslims in senior roles in offices as well. Okay, so during my time, there were some quite high profile partners that were Muslims. So they represent our sort of, our outlook at the more senior level as well. So my general answer to that is yes, there's flexibility in practicing your deen.
Thank you. Next one here is, are accountancy exams relevant for all service areas?
I'd say not all. But I think with the tax department, you'd qualify on the graduate scheme. You still do your chartered accountancy exams. Obviously, for audit, you do the chartered accountancy exams. For actuarial services, they have their own set of exams that qualify you as an actuary. But it's worth looking into this. Sorry, I don't have the sort of detailed information for each of the departments, but you definitely find that on the websites for the Big Four and the other sort of professional services firms as well.
Okay, sure, thank you. And then next one is, how does having a master's in accounting and finance help your chances of getting into a graduate scheme with the Big Four?
It would. I wouldn't necessarily say that it improves your chances. It proves that you have an interest, and it gives you some sort of financial knowledge and background. Okay, so you can maybe leverage that. If you sort of say that, okay, with this experience that you've got, or this knowledge that you've got from doing the financial account or doing the financial sort of studies, what you've done with that, maybe you might have set up your own business, or you can maybe sort of show some insight that you have from that knowledge around sort of the current affairs in the industry or the economy, for example, and show that you're actually putting the theory to some use. So that's maybe how it would help with your application. Once you're actually in the scheme itself and doing your chartered accountancy exams, having some relevant degree level qualifications would exempt you from some exams. Okay, so I hadn't mentioned that before, but sometimes you do get some exemptions from exams because you've done some accounting related modules at university or some business related modules at university.
Okay, thank you. So now so I think you did mention about the interview process. So I think the question here is, if you have any disabilities such as a stammer during your application process, does that help or does that hinder the process? And do you have to disclose it if you was to?
Yeah, I definitely think it would not hinder your process. Okay, I don't think it would necessarily help either, but the companies will be very accommodating. I'm sure during your application, I mean, almost all applications now will have a box around whether you have any disabilities or not, so they can cater for your needs, whether you're in a wheelchair, etc. If you have a stammer, make them aware, and then they will sort of be understanding of that. And work around it. I've worked with people that had disabilities. I can't remember working with anybody with a stammer, but I don't see why that would be a problem. I remember at PwC on the training scheme, there were some other trainees that they were in a wheelchair, sort of full term because they couldn't walk, and they did perfectly well in PwC. So, and I think generally the larger corporate companies, they not that they just are, but they have to be accommodating for people of sort of all types and disabilities as well.
Okay, sure, thank you. So this is about the application process now. If the application needs to be completed the year before graduation, how do you monitor when the application opens or closes?
There's information on the websites. If you go on the website, then I guess if you're looking at it beforehand, then you'll know when the deadline is. Usually, let's say for a September start, so we're in 2020 now. If you wanted to apply for this September 2021 start, then the application would open on the website more than 12 months before. So maybe around July, August time, the applications online would have opened. Now we're just at the start of November. They might have just closed now, or they might be closing very soon. So it's worth checking.
Okay, thank you. How do we find examples of questions on which one needs to prepare for the interviews itself?
So typically when you get the information and you get invited for an interview, the firm will give you some clues and some indication around what kind of questions you might be asked and what kind of things to prepare. Also, I do some reading I know when I was preparing for my interviews, just the PwC website was very helpful. They often sort of show you some clips about interview questions. So showing you like a role play of an interviewer or interviewee, and what kind of questions are asked and what kind of answers are expected. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the information that's available on the websites themselves. I think they're quite useful, especially with the graduate schemes.
Okay, sure, thank you. And so currently during the pandemic, are you aware if the graduate process has changed, or will that all be part of the application process and it will be noted on the website, I would have assumed?
Yeah, sorry, I haven't looked at the actual application process for this year, but I imagine, I mean, their offices are opening for business, like, you know, people are going into work if they need to. So they will have adapted, but they will still be recruiting. And it might be that they have some online interviews as well, and maybe some online group sessions like we are here on Zoom. But I expect that, you know, if you might have some interviews in person as well, no doubt.
Okay, sure. And I think you did mention that in terms of the examination, 80% of the people usually pass first time, but then if you have to resit, you have to pay for yourselves. How many chances do they give you before they kind of say, okay, you know what, bye bye?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually they don't set a number, and if they do, then usually it is also flexible depending on the rest of you as a person and your performance. Okay, so like I said, I wouldn't worry that much. If you get into the Big Four, then almost certainly you'll pass the exam, you know, in at most 2 attempts. Okay, but I've known people to sort of do it for a 3rd time or a 4th time. Okay, but they've been sort of, you know, still good trainees, and, you know, their audit work is good. Maybe they've got, you know, if you have an excuse as well for, you know, why you haven't passed one of the times, then they'll be understanding. So yeah, there's not always a hard limit. But also, if you are really struggling, and you're also a very bad auditor as well, and you know, you've sort of upset people in the office, then they do terminate some contracts just because they feel like you don't fit in the firm, and also you might not be able to pass your exams.
Okay, sure, thank you. And then once qualified and completed exams, will you be contracted to stay at the firm for a certain time?
Not at all, not at all. So once you've qualified, you can leave almost immediately. And you know what the good thing is? That somehow recruiters know that you've qualified. Okay, so you start getting calls from recruiters to say, "Are you looking for a role outside of, you know, PwC? There's this role available here, internal audit here, management accountant here." So there's no obligation to stay. You'll get headhunted because a lot of companies look for, you know, a newly qualified graduate to come in and join their team and work upwards, especially from the Big Four as well. Some companies specifically recruit for Big Four graduates. So so yeah, if you don't want to stay, you don't have to stay. Some people leave immediately.
Okay, sure. Just one final question for me. I think we have run out of all the questions from online. I think in the initial stages, you said that you have to do the first assessment, second assessment, but the key one here is to please the partner himself. If he's happy with you, then you know the process becomes easier and you've got more chances. Any examples of what needs to be done in order to kind of make sure that you are that person who gets hired once you have that interview?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the main things you want to get across is that you're a likable person. I think that, you know, that you'd get on with people in the office, you'd get on with the partner themselves, because like I said, I think the training is really good and the college tuition is really good. Most people will pass the exams without much trouble. Okay, so in the interview, they're not really assessing whether you're going to pass the exams or not, because you probably will. And most people can put the hours in as well if they want to, right? But sometimes, because you're working in teams pretty much all the time, and you're working with lots of different teams, and you're representing PwC when you go out to see a client, okay, you might be, as an auditor, as a junior auditor, as a trainee, you might be on site at the client site for maybe 2 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, sometimes on the larger jobs, right? You're there for 8 weeks, speaking to the client every day. But the partner might come out once or twice in that 8-week period. So the client rarely sees the partner. You're representing PwC when you're out there. And if you're not a likable person, then you're not giving, you know, you're not representing PwC very well. So really they want somebody that, you know, has some personality, has maybe a sense of humor. And that will impress the partner and make sure, you know, make you a likable person and an employable person as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So for all who are listening in there, you know, this is a great opportunity, and if you think that someone needs to go through this, and I highly recommend it. And the reason why I say this is because I have not gone through the Big Four, but I usually deal with people from the Big Four, and some of my colleagues usually are from Big Four, and the way the way you've said it, it kind of gives a brand to your CV. So definitely well worth it. I think that was it from a questions perspective. Farid Bhai, off you go, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. MashaAllah, Jazakallah, and thank you, Mubarak, for giving your time tonight for this session. I had two questions. One was, you mentioned when you were doing your graduate scheme, sometimes you had to stay till late. Now, is it something that is ongoing even after you've done this graduate scheme? It's just, for people who want to get into it. Is it something like once you have done your graduate scheme, or how often does this happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It doesn't stop once you finish your graduate scheme. When you're staying late because you've got work to do, and your managers will have work, your senior managers will have work as well. And don't forget, it'd be unfair if I'm a manager or a senior manager. It'd be unfair for me to say to my team, "You guys stay in the office until 10 p.m. I'm going to go home at 5." So if the team has work, the managers and so more senior people usually stick around for solidarity, and also they have work to do as well, because the work is kind of shared. Whatever work you're doing as a junior auditor, they will be reviewing it, and plus doing some other work on the client as well. So it doesn't get any easier. I've got friends that have gone up to being senior managers and directors, and they've always worked very hard, doing lots of long hours on weekday evenings and some weekends as well. So the work doesn't get any easier at any stage, even after you qualify.
SubhanAllah. So another question will be like, what will be your advice to, especially, any students who are listening to you right now? They might be thinking in their mind, they've just finished their graduation. What they expect is, coming out of this, this cycle of exams or studies. And then once they join these graduate scheme, again, they have to go through this process of studying and going through professional exams. So what will be your advice to them?
I think it's a good time to do more exams, because you're in the routine of doing exams, aren't you?
Yeah.
For me, certainly, doing the university exams were harder than doing these graduate scheme exams. Okay. So the professional exams generally aren't, it's certainly for the chartered accountancy, they're not that hard in terms of the subject matter to grasp. I found the exams to be more challenging in terms of the time pressure. And I think they set it like that because the material is you can grasp it. So how do you make it challenging to get you to do lots of work within a short amount of time? Okay, so for that you need good exam technique to make sure you're getting the right marks at the right times, and you don't waste your time writing lots of stuff that actually doesn't earn you any marks. But I think it's well worth it. You do your exams within 2 years, just over 2 years in the training scheme. And don't forget, it's in short bursts as well. So at university, you're studying for 12, not full 12 months, but you're studying full time, really, aren't you? Whenever at university, you're studying and you're doing exams at the end of each term or at the end of the year. Whereas if you're doing your professional exams, you'll have a few weeks of dedicated college study, at the end of which you do exams, and then you'll go back to work to do audit work for a few months until you have another sort of cycle of exams. So it's in short bursts, so it won't feel as intense as if you're going through university.
SubhanAllah. Jazakallah. There's one more question just came to my mind. And it was like many a times our youngsters, when it comes to deciding, what career they want to get into, money becomes somewhere, deciding factor. They would like to go in a profession which can compensate them well, financially. Now, when it comes to career in finance, can you just give them brief insight, like how career progression can be? Of course, you did cover slides on how you are compensated, but still, if you can just shed a little bit of light on that in terms of career progression and how financially you are compensated once you are in finance field.
Yeah, of course. So really, it varies. Let's say, I'm going to assume that we've gone through the graduate scheme here. Once you're a qualified chartered accountant, where can your career go? And in terms of what's your kind of financial sort of your pay going to be, it can really vary depending on how ambitious you are. Okay, depending on how much you push yourself, and depending on the firms you join and the mentors you have, you can sort of start earning. You can get into the six figures, within 3 or 4 or 5 years after having qualified. But you have to be really ambitious, and you have to also have the opportunities given to you that aren't always in your hands. Also, you get some people that, they're qualified, but they want a more settled job. They don't want to be putting lots of hours in, and, they don't want the work to dominate their life. And you can still, you can get to sort of 50, 60K comfortably, without working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'd say, you need to sort of try to find a balance between how much effort you want to put into your career, and how much money you think you need to earn. Obviously, it shouldn't all be about money, but we have bills to pay and, families to support. But before that, of course, and Akilbhai, you can sort of, say it better than I can, but when you're earning money, before you earn any money, or before you sort of intend for higher salaries, intend to give some of it to sadaqah before you sort of spend it on yourself. So inshallah, with that, you'll have more blessings in your income.
Subhanallah. Jazakallah, mashallah. You've concluded on very good point. Like, before you think of earning something, even make your intention to give it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, one of the reasons why this Hope initiative started was so that we take these professional careers, so that this can strengthen our community. Any community or society is measured by the members of that society. So if there are more educated people, that community will be looked at with respect. So Jazakallah for your time. Inshallah, there's going to be another session in 2 weeks' time. And we are joined by Brother Shabir from Preston, who is going to deliver that webinar. So Shabir bhai, can you just quickly mention what that webinar is going to be, so that our audiences, they can prepare themselves, as well as they can pass on this information to anyone who can benefit from it. Over to you, Shabir bhai.
Jazakallah khair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, viewers and participants. Mashallah, Mubarak Bhai spoken in detail about the graduate scheme, but in 2 weeks' time, and I've done 2 sessions already, a general careers overview, and going to university. But the 3rd session, which concludes my 3 sessions that I was going to do, is to finish off with apprenticeship, and it quite nicely fits in with today's topic as well. Now, graduate schemes are at the higher end, higher level, but I'm going to talk about level 2, level 3, level 4. So even school leavers can go into apprenticeships, college leavers can go into apprenticeships. And I know some of the questions that were asked today were based around apprenticeships anyway. So I will just generally talk about apprenticeships for school leavers, college leavers, and give you more insight into what are apprenticeships, how do they work, how do employers view these apprenticeships, what are your commitment as an employee, as an apprentice, what should you be doing, what the employer expects from you, and then I will generally then talk about occupation. So I know today was about finance world, but apprenticeships tend to be in many different occupations, from engineering to finance to even sport, business, accounting. So there are different levels of apprenticeships as well in different occupations, and how do you choose? And also I will make a slight comparison into if somebody's, and a lot of people still unaware or undecided about, should I go to college, or should I go to university, or should I go and get an apprenticeship? And young people are very confused. And I will give you some comparison into making choices, informed choices, in terms of whether somebody should be choosing apprenticeships or whether they should be choosing university. And it's not something that we as advisors can tell somebody. but I can give you as much information as possible, and then people can make informed choices. So it's going to be in 2 weeks' time, a general overview of apprenticeships, and including higher apprenticeships. And then I'll go into application process and different occupations.
Subhanallah, thank you. Jazakallah, Shabir bhai. So it's not only that these 3 sessions you'll be concluding. I remember you mentioned one more that was to do with student finance.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Sorry, Chef. Yeah.
So inshallah, once we are done with this, so for some reason, it's a bit difficult for me to forget things if something is mentioned. So
no, Jazakallah.
So inshallah,
yes.
we'll plan something here. And just to remind all our participants, if you have got any questions, if you need any help, for these about today's session, and if you need any further information on the Big 4 graduate scheme, you can email to us. Our contact information is there. We are there on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. So you can send your whatever questions you have. We will forward it to Brother Mubarak and our sisters if they want. If they want their sister Sitara, who has volunteered to help any sisters who want any assistance in regards to this graduate scheme. Likewise, it was yesterday I was contacted by Brother Qasim Ali, who works for Deloitte, and even he has volunteered that if anyone needs any help in regards to these graduate scheme, he is more than happy to help anyone. So the only thing is you need to get to us with any questions, any queries you have, and then inshallah we will forward it to these members who have volunteered, who have come forward to help our community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all our effort, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward us in this dunya as well as in the akhirah. So with this, inshallah, we conclude this today's session. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.